Dr. Caffery here. Today I want to discuss with you hidden food reactions in autoimmunity, specifically as it relates to neurological or brain autoimmunity. So remember, autoimmunity is when the immune system attacks the body's own tissues, attacks oneself. So this is taken from a study published in 2014, and the title of the study is The Prevalence of Antibodies being the way the immune system tags something as being foreign. So the prevalence of antibodies against wheat and milk proteins in blood donors and their contributions to neuroimmune reactivities. So neuroimmune meaning brain immune system type reactions or disorders. So from the study, we assessed the reactivity of sera, that's blood, from 400 donors to wheat and milk proteins. So these were healthy donors used in this study. So it wasn't individuals that were sick or had disease. These were individuals that were healthy, and 400 were sampled, and they looked for reactivity to wheat and milk proteins. So I'll tell you, in this study, they found on average about 12% of the individuals were reactive to both wheat and milk proteins. They also looked for reactivity to certain neurological tissues, one being GAD65, that stands for glutamic acid decarboxylase 65, and this is an enzyme found in the brain. It's found outside the brain too, but in this case we're referencing the brain. Cerebellar tissue, this is just a specific part of the brain, posterior or back region of the brain. Myelin basic protein, which is covering of the nerves, and then what's called myelin oligodendrocyte glycoprotein, which is again a portion of the covering of the nerves. So to continue reading, statistical analysis showed significant clustering when certain wheat and milk protein antibodies were cross-referenced with neural antibodies. So there was relationships between wheat and milk reactivity and certain neurological reactivity. Approximately half of the sera of the blood with antibody elevation against gliadin reacted significantly with GAD65 and cerebellar peptides. So they're saying of that 12% that had reactions to these gluten-based proteins, about half of them had reactions to these neurological tissues, GAD65 and the cerebellum. So GAD65, this is implicated in anxiety disorders. This can be implicated in seizures. This can be implicated in stiff muscle, something called stiff person syndrome. It can be implicated in a variety of things. Cerebellar peptides, this can be implicated in balance disorders, what's called ataxia. There's something called gluten ataxia, where we know that gluten can provoke these antibodies. This could be implicated in vertigo, problems with balance and equilibrium, things of that nature. So to continue reading, about half the sera, the blood, with elevated antibodies against alpha and beta casein, that's a milk protein, dairy protein, and milk butyrophilin, again a dairy protein, also showed antibody elevation against myelin basic protein and myelin oligodendrocyte glycoprotein. So these are coverings of the nerves. So about half these individuals that were reactive to dairy proteins also showed reactions to myelin-based proteins. And so what's the link between these two? Well, it's known that some of these proteins are actually cross-reactive. That means that their amino acid sequences are similar enough, or their building block sequences are similar enough, close enough, that if you had a reaction to the food, there's potential that you could cross-react with your neurological tissue that looks similar. And this demonstrates some of that. This is taken from a different study by the same author, but this is just showing the myelin protein up top and then the milk butyrophilin below, and you see that there's several amino acid sequences that are similar in these two. So again, they're similar enough that that could potentially elicit this cross-reactivity, or what's called molecular mimicry mechanism. So in summary, if you have any kind of neurological autoimmune disorder, it's worthwhile looking at reactivity to gluten and wheat and dairy-based proteins. Or if you're just a healthy individual and you have reactivity to gluten or wheat or dairy-based proteins, there's a 50% probability per this study that you might have something underlying like this, and that's worth looking into. So my suggestion is work with a qualified practitioner who's aware of these relationships and can look into these things, investigate these things, and coach you through how to approach this appropriately. I'm Dr. Caffery. Thank you for listening.